Everybody, welcome to the show. Welcome to the For the Love podcast. Amy and I are delighted to see you. Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but we have an election this year. Have you heard?
I have a little bit.
It is, stuff's going on. Things are happening. Words are said. There's a bunch in the zeitgeist. And it's just all-encompassing. It's just everywhere. It matters. It's important. It can be overwhelming. It can feel daunting, and in some cases even paralyzing. And so, our guests this week, as you know, are going to help us process and synthesize and try to make sense of all that's happening. But before we talk to them, and they are fan favorites on this show, certainly fan favorites of mine, I want to ask you first. I think I know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear what is your input channel for taking in news? Like, I don't necessarily mean which exact channel on the television set, but like what's your intake valve? How do you do it? What are your filters? How much do you take in? All of it.
I've dialed it in pretty well. Mostly reading.
Oh.
No 24-hour news.
Okay. So when you say reading, like articles,
Articles,
New York Times, The Atlantic, whatever.
pick and choose. NPR.
Yeah.
I will watch like a cable news 11 o'clock show, like just for the daily news. But gone are the days of having the TV on during the day. It's too much.
It is.
And I do dabble in Twitter, but only like reading independent journalists and like one constitutional law guy. So if I have a question about something, I know where to go. They link source documents, they explain things, but I don't get in the weeds on that platform at all.
Which kudos to you for finding a way to not get in the weeds on Twitter. I quit Twitter probably 3 or 4 years ago because I just realized this is creating a low hum of crazy in my brain.
It's absolute garbage, but it's a good resource. Like I treat it like, Wikipedia or whatever. You go and you find the links to the good stuff. And it's been vetted if you follow carefully.
Yeah.
So that's all I use it for.
Yeah.
No comment sections.
Right. See, that's just it. I didn't use it judiciously. I just used it as it came to me.
Like live tweeted The Bachelor.
Well,
or whatever.
yeah. Like that's when it was fun back in the olden days.
No, that's not how I use it. But I do read some every day. Look at NPR. That's about it.
I actually learned our guests, which we'll introduce to you guys in just a minute, taught me, I think maybe either the last time or the first time they were on this show, that to be incredibly cautious and even wary of any like cable news programs. And so I just remember thinking that was very wise advice because I have my preferred network, which is the one that agrees with me.
Right, exactly.
That's the one I like. And so anyway, I have found that I have to also steward my intake because I find myself so worked up and so worried and so anxious and then so furious. And that level of intensity has this corrosive effect on me, which at that point I start to go silent. Like I just go, I can't handle this. I can't manage this. I can't talk to you. You don't even, and then I'm all over the place. And so I have to also steward my intake so that it's a wise quantity and the quality of the input is less salacious. But that is hard. That is not the way our world is set up right now.
No, not at all. But I think you're not alone. I think all of us, it's a natural instinct to become more siloed and more silent because
Yeah.
Like at this point, we're all avoiding conflict.
Yes,
just to
exactly.
maintain our lives.
And our relationships.
Right.
It has gotten that bad.
And as our guests will say later on, it's exciting to be involved in this. Like, democracy is actually amazing. It requires everybody. Like, don't run yourself ragged just on your daily news.
I know.
There's actual work to be done.
I did like hearing that. Anyways, speaking of, before we onboard our guests here, let's head into one of our segments that we love called Culture Shock. All right. This is just us discussing something in culture. It could be something important. It could be something like Bachelor in Paradise. Today, it's important. So, the DNC. Let's talk about the DNC. We're going to talk about this kind of at length with our guest today, but I would like to know, number one, I already know this. This is a fake question. Did you watch it? I know that you did. Okay. How about a highlight? What was a highlight for you?
Mrs. Obama.
God.
And her husband.
Yes.
She was incredible. We watched it live, like the final speeches live every night. And then I go back the next day and rewatch things. And my friend said, you have to go watch the roll call. And so I did. And that was amazing.
Yes. Right. Like, I like ceremony. And so that was
ceremony like I've never seen before.
Yeah.
Though I have not paid attention to any roll call at any convention my whole life. And that felt
unifying.
So fun unifying and hopeful, and everybody was represented. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's so true. That doesn't get a lot of press, but that's the kind of stuff that gives me like a lump in my throat for some reason. I'm very drawn to pomp and circumstance. Why? I don't know, but I certainly am. I would say for me, yes, and yes. Agree to agree. And also I loved Kamala's acceptance speech too. It just was, I cried a little. But I think for me, I was really moved by Tim Walz. I didn't know him before this. I didn't know him before she selected him as her running mate. But something about him has reached an interior place for me that has gone so dark, so cynical about politics, about politicians, about goodness, about, they all say they're ordinary, and none of them are. These are not ordinary people.
Not a single one.
But this guy, pretty ordinary. Like something about his Midwestern coach, teacher. God, I don't know what I was looking at. Something on Instagram yesterday, and I forgot. He was on some podcast interview just with a regular person, and he was like, they were talking about homeownership, and he says something like, for me, the most neglected part of home ownership is gutters. And I take this personally. And I'm like, I want this. I'm interested in why you take gutter neglect personally. Like,
he reminds me of those insurance commercials where it's like, don't turn into your parents.
Yes.
But he's like the version we want.
But the good version, right? Like
good version.
He's wholesome. He's got a wholesomeness to him, to say nothing of his very impressive record. His policies, his leadership has just, I'm so in alignment with it. I'm so drawn to him and his kid.
Oh my gosh.
I can't deal with it. I mean, I think everything's just been so mean and ugly and gross for a decade that just seeing something so like pure, almost embarrassing in its like bald candor was just like, I don't know. It was Wall's
highlight.
family for the win for me.
Yes.
Um,
Agree.
okay. We're going to talk about the DNC more. So stay tuned because our guests have thoughts because they were there the whole time. Okay.
First,
Yeah.
let's move into Gen Excellence.
Time for a little Gen Excellence. You're really gonna love some Gen Excellence.
Okay.
In keeping with the theme, what's one of your first memories about politics or political culture that you remember?
I hope I'm not taking your answer because you mentioned this to me earlier. But okay, first of all, as a late adopter to having any sort of civic responsibility, this is very embarrassing, you guys. I'm so embarrassed to tell you this. I don't know if I've ever admitted this, actually. I did not vote in my first 2 presidential elections that I could have. Oh, I know. I just did not have any. It wasn't like my campus climate in college at all. And I wasn't surrounded by like civic-minded kids or even adults at that time. We were in a different lane. And I honestly almost have no memory of it. Like, I almost have no memory of elections or like these big conversations that were certainly happening like in the early 90s.
Oh my gosh.
Right. I mean, so much was going on globally and certainly nationally. Anyway, that's so embarrassing. And so I want you to know that I was definitely like a late, decent citizen. I was in my 20s before I voted for a president. And so my first actual memory of anything that was truly political, although I would not have known to uplink it to a political chamber at the time, was my just fear of the Cold War. Like, I remember being in 4th grade at Mulberry Elementary School, and I don't think this was regional. You'll have to confirm this, but we'd have to go out into the hallway and have nuclear bomb drills. Nuclear bombs. So from what I can remember, I think we were backs against the wall, head between the knees. I think, if I remember right, we held a textbook over our head, I guess. How was that going to help us from the nuclear blast? I don't know that we were safe, to be honest. I didn't really fully even understand what any of that meant. I just knew it was scary and it scared me. I knew it had something to do with Russia, which was just some big, unnamed, confusing enemy. And that I was pretty sure that we were going to be bombed. My town of Houma, Louisiana. I was just pretty sure that for some reason nuclear war was inevitable in South Louisiana.
Well, I believe that because we were explicitly told that.
Well, okay.
In San Antonio, we had so many Air Force bases. So we were always told, I don't know if it's lore or truth, that we were number 2 on the hit list. I wonder
if that is true.
DC first, then San Antonio to take out the Air Force. We also just hid under our desks with a textbook.
Oh, yeah.
And
so you were as safe as I was?
Like, not understanding it, obviously, at a young age, but also having the wherewithal to think, how's my desk going to protect me? Like, I would go to the bases. Like, I knew where they were in my city. They weren't that far away.
Sure. Yeah. But at least I'm under my desk.
Right.
Is that your first memory?
No, not at all. That was all through elementary school. We didn't do that in middle school.
Same.
But,
I don't.
My first real memory is going to vote with my mom. And it must have been in the Carter Ford election. 76. But I remember going into the booth and her pulling the curtain and her saying, you don't ever have to tell anyone who you vote for. That is private and it's rude to ask.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not telling you.
Oh.
And I was like, oh,
okay.
Which, considering our political landscape now and social media and
totally,
it's not at all a private thing, but it still can be.
It can be.
Once you go in your little booth,
Yeah.
we don't have curtains anymore. I wish we did. But still, yeah, that's my first.
That's a good memory.
Walking past all the signs and standing in line and then going in the little booth.
That's such a good memory.
And
I took my littles with me to vote. I wanted them to see it.
then the result of that election was there was an Amy in the White House.
Good times.
Which, yes, there's 80 million of
Now.
us, for sure.
Yeah.
But just having an Amy in the White House felt special.
Nice. God, how have we never had a Jennifer in the White House?
Statistically, it doesn't make sense.
How did one of them not name their daughters Jennifer? Everyone else did. You know, they named them Jennifer and Amy.
Yes.
We were the number 1 and number 2 names of our generation. So I didn't even know that I felt jealous of your representation at the highest levels of government. Congrats. Okay, those are good. Those are good. I don't know if I've ever voted without being like choked up, and I'm choked up now just thinking about it, like being in line and seeing everybody. I don't know how everybody's voting. It's not even that. It's that we're all here. We get to do this. We get to participate. Our vote matters, theoretically. And I don't know, something about it. Again, it's ceremonial, sort of.
I get anxious standing in line. Like, I really feel the
weight of it.
the gravitas, the
It is.
importance. Like, as cynical as I can get about things, when I'm standing in line to vote, I'm nervous.
Yeah.
I take it seriously.
Me too.
When it's over, I'm like, okay, I've done my part. That was my part.
Gosh, it's so true.
So
So on that note, let's bring our guest in today because, well, first of all, these ladies are no strangers to this show. I believe this is their 3rd appearance here, and I have been on theirs, and we are actual friends. We have become friends through all these conversations that we've had together. And so we just, in this world, keep them on speed dial when we need to process an election season or some really thorny politics, or we have to figure out dialogue between different ideologies, right? Which is, I guess, always now. So their perspectives as women, smart women at that, very smart women, wives and moms, highly engaged citizens, both of them, are relatable and important, certainly to me and to this community and to Amy. And so truly their origin story was actually seeing the political landscape from 2 different camps. And they'll discuss that right when at the top of the interview. But so we're talking today, again, delightfully, to Sarah, Stewart, Holland, and Beth Silvers. These are our friends from, you know them, Pantsuit Politics. What a community they have built. Like, I love their work in the world. So if you're not familiar, Pantsuit Politics podcast, it's been featured in the New York Times, the Atlantic, named by Apple Podcast as one of the best shows of 2021. Sarah and Beth speak all over the place, businesses, universities, civic organizations, about essentially improving political dialogue. They come by their knowledge honestly, both by credentials and experience. They've worked behind the curtain. Sarah started her career as a congressional staffer and a campaign aide, and then moved into like blogger and social media consultant. Beth has a law degree. She's practiced law, and she served as a human resources exec and business coach. So they're wise, they're measured. I trust them. And these are the exact sort of leaders that I'm interested in bringing to our podcast community, and where we can continue to build sort of a safe place for conversation and dialogue and processing. So we're delighted to bring back to the show today, Sarah and Beth. Well, 2 of my favorite people on earth are here. Hi. Hi.
You
Beth
are
and Sarah.
beloved
Hi.
to us.
We're just clapping
Beloved.
for your appearance on this show yet again. Thank you for answering my email every time I email you.
What I wouldn't do if you texted me and asked me? Nothing.
I know.
There's nothing I wouldn't do.
I know. And you've now met Amy, and now here we all are.
And we're
So-
together, and we're best friends.
Well, that's just how it is. And so it's a weird time. It's a weird time in America, if you hadn't known. And so here, like over at the show and just kind of in this ecosystem, my question is constantly like, all right, what does good leadership look like right now? How do I help my community process? Where can we host conversations that are productive? How can we figure out an off-ramp out of the crazy and come over here where dialogue might live and ideas and decency? And so you are some of our very best leaders in that space. And you have been this for your own community, certainly, but also for mine for years. So we definitely wanted you in today to just talk about this very casual election going on.
Listen, we went from a death march to a dance party. What's the big deal?
What's the big deal? See, that's where we're just gonna come out of the gate. We're gonna just talk about it all. Here's a quick though, if you don't mind, for any of my listeners, our listeners who maybe this is their first episode that they've heard with us and with you, and don't know your story, would you mind giving like the 20,000 foot arc of your partnership, kind of its origin, what that looked like, and sort of in however much detail you want to include its evolution and what y'all's deal is? Like, why are you here talking to us about the DNC? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's y'all's deal? Okay.
What's our deal?
Yeah.
We started talking to each other about politics in front of the internet in 2015. So we are grandmas in the internet conversation space.
Elder statesman, if you will.
I like to think of it that way. And we wanted to just have conversations that included all of our context, where we're not showing up as pundits. We are not working for a campaign or a candidate. We're just people. And so we can talk about politics, but not as compartmentalized as you hear conversations about politics everywhere else. So you're going to hear us talk about a war, but what that means to us as moms and people of faith and people who are married to other people and have friendships and our daughters. So we just try to bring all of our experiences to these conversations. When we started, we thought it would be a good elevator pitch to explain to people that I was a registered Republican and Sarah was a registered Democrat. So we were Sarah from the left and Beth from the right. And Jen, I don't like to disappoint people, so that didn't go very well for me because quickly.
What do you mean?
Quickly.
The internet's reasonable. I don't
It
understand what
is.
you're saying.
It is.
Emotionally regulated, in
Yeah,
my
yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, nuanced.
Yeah.
So- Quickly, I started receiving emails from mostly conservative men breaking up with me. I have tried to listen to you, Beth.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that we were on the same page, but it's abundantly clear that you are too liberal, and that's okay. So over time, our evolution has been that I have let go of trying to describe myself through the lens of a party. I have been a registered Republican and a registered Democrat and back again, mostly due to Kentucky being a closed primary state. So I just am registered in a strategic way for each election. Where does my vote make the most difference? But we still try to do that thing where we just sit down and we talk about it all holistically, and we're very honest about how we feel about an issue. And we also try to be very honest about what we've learned. Just here are the facts as we understand them. This is the context as we understand it. Here's what that reminds me of. You know, Sarah brings in a lot of historic context. I try to think, I'm a future problem-solving coach for elementary and middle school kids. I try to think about where could this go? And we just do that in hopes that our discussion will teach us more about ourselves and each other and then start good conversations for our audience.
That sounds lovely.
That's it.
And how's that
Our
feel?
listeners call us the America's political therapist. We're just trying to process everything.
I like that elevator pitch.
We're just trying to process together. We're not reporters. We're just working through what it means to be an American in 2024.
And pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people check out. If you don't create a space for them to process and say, I don't know, or I don't understand that, or I changed my mind, then they see, politics as a place for political rats to death battle. And they're like, that's not me. So I don't want a piece of that. And we don't want that. Everybody needs to participate. Everybody needs to be, they don't need to be a political rat, but they do need to pay attention. Because even when people who don't pay attention, either one, tell you all the time they feel bad that they don't pay attention. I feel really bad that I'm not paying attention.
Oh, yeah.
But I just can't. Or they're paying just enough attention for it to, leave them anxiety ridden.
Yep.
And so those are not great options. So we try to present a different way.
We definitely want to talk to you about the DNC. You guys went. You were there. Were you there for the whole thing?
Oh, yeah, baby. I got there Saturday.
Oh, man. It's very buzzy.
It
was very, very buzzy.
It was electric. The electricity metaphors were apt, okay?
We're going to get to that. I want to come one step back, though, first. And I'd love to hear you two discuss your thoughts on the whole Kamala stepping forward, taking over the pole position, if you will, instead of Biden running. That was kind of a political moment that was unprecedented, at least for me to witness. She's polling well. I really like her VP choice. I think that was clearly, obviously, strategic, but smart and good. But also in 2016, I had a bottle of very expensive champagne in my refrigerator because I thought we were about to see the first female president of the United States, which was just a historical moment. No matter however you want to slice and dice that, I thought we were about to watch history happen. And so I now come into 2024 with guard on my little heart, like church taught me, guard your heart, guard your heart. So I think I'd like to hear you guys talk about your opinion on Biden stepping aside, Kamala coming forward. How do you see her in the political landscape right now? How do you read the polls, etc.?
I mean, look, I have been a Democrat since I was 18 years old. It's a long journey. I've had a lot of intense emotions surrounding presidential elections. My first presidential election was 2000, when we didn't know, and ultimately the Supreme Court decided. So I dove in off the deep end. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I've been in it. Right. And I do not remember anything as intense, including 2016. That was intense, but it was intense in a different way. As this journey from the debate until when he dropped out. Never experienced anything like it. My family was in Japan, which made it even more intense because we would get a dump of news when we woke up. Oh, yeah. And my 15-year-old son, Griffin, and I were just consumed with it. And I was very upset because it felt like if he had gone forward, it was not the party I knew that I had belonged to for most of my adult life. I had told a friend, if he does not drop out, I will change my party identification. I cannot stay a Democrat.
You did?
If he stays and looks at this and says, and we all just go, well, I guess we'll death march into defeat to a second term of Donald Trump. I said, I won't be able to stay. I can't do that. That's not who I know myself. That's not who I know the Democratic Party to be. And, and I've really let his decision work on me, not just politically, because I think that was history, to watch someone step away from power like that. I mean, these people die in their chairs, sometimes literally. Supreme Court, the Senate, this is a big deal, right? Yeah. And I just think, back to my thing about critics, I'm like, okay, I gotta, Joe Biden taught us that sometimes we don't even know ourselves that well as we do even later in life, right? Sometimes you gotta let other people say, you don't know what you see. What you see might not be right. And I'm it's really shook me, personally. And watching Tim Walz, the everyman who only has a pension, doesn't even own a dang stock. Just all of it. I just think it's so beautiful because it's just humans rising to the moment, right? That never gets old to me. That's what politics can really be, including politicians who I know get a really bad rap. But watching them kind of come into a moment they couldn't have expected watching kind of history show up on their doorsteps and go, all right, let's do it. You know, like I think it's just been so exhilarating. And I think the polling reflects Americans feel that. They feel that. We were saying from the beginning, we felt it among our audience. When it was Biden and Trump, everybody was like, really?
It was bleak.
It was bleak.
Yeah.
Americans want elections about the future.
Yeah.
They want to talk about the future. And it was just something about the Olympics and this like reclaiming of patriotism. I think Americans are careful. They're not going to fall in love as quickly as the internet over some coconut memes.
Yeah.
But I think that you will see the more they feel like, okay, I've done my due diligence. She's done her due diligence. She's done the debate. She sat down with the media. She's telling us what she's going to do. It's not this like radical vision. Okay. I think the polling will continue to climb. That's my instinct as a person who's been in politics for a long time.
I love to hear what you're saying. I think that reaction is indicative of how a lot of us felt, like a little just relieved, and then excited, which kind of gave way a little bit. I don't know. Was that your take?
Yes. Well, I was in a tent without cell service
Again, like I told you, we're not the same.
for the debate.
I was in a
So-
cottage that I'd rented on a lake.
So I missed it.
Oh.
But
Did you
when
really
we were
miss
in the-
anything? I don't
No.
Oh God.
I was
great
really
point.
sad that I was missing it, and we really did have super spotty coverage. But if we were in the car, like, you know, in the mountains, all of a sudden you get like everything at once. And so in the days following the debate, you know, a couple of times a day, I just get disaster.
Yeah. Panic at the disco.
Panic at the disco.
And
Yeah.
it was so sad, and I just didn't see a way forward.
Yeah.
But then I would, you know, lose service and sort of go back to vacation brain. But then when he stepped down, like we were back home, I was trying to plug in, but I was plugging into woe. It was hard to re-engage,
It was.
honestly.
Well, and to Beth's eternal credit, she was not surprised. She's been in Kamala's camp for a while.
Well, I was thinking back at Jenna, we said about witnessing history in 2016, and we did, just not the history we intended. And so when I think about President Biden and what was left after the Trump administration, which changed so much of the federal government, in addition to stressing us all out online every day, it changed so much of the federal government. So you have COVID and you have the Trump administration. I think President Biden was probably the right person for the moment and tried to give him all the credit for that throughout his term. But I have been kind of mid on President Biden the whole way. I think he's done a good job, but I'm not like a fangirl. I really do think a lot of the vice president, and have from the beginning. I think she has been dramatically and unfairly undercovered in the media. I think the Biden team bears some responsibility for that. I think they did not want the contrast of her vibrance next to the president. I think that they gave her some really tough issues in her portfolio. I think that was a mix of kind of Joe Biden's respect for what the vice president can do since he had that job, and also saddling her with some things that the president didn't want to get spilling on him in the media. I read about this immigration czar idea about her, which was never her title. From the reporting that I've read, what happened is that she's in a meeting about immigration, and she says, we are never going to be able to police our way out of this. The southern border cannot be the only fight in dealing with immigration. We have got to get to the Northern Triangle and ask, why are people coming here? And how can we keep them in their own countries, stable, economically resilient, able to have a good life there? And from that meeting, they assigned to her the root causes of immigration, okay, which is an unbelievably complex and long-term play. And she could have whined about that for years, and instead she went to work. And she developed all kinds of public-private partnerships in the Northern Triangle. And guess what? Today, we don't hear as much about people immigrating from those countries, right? We still have an immigration problem, but it has shifted. The makeup of people coming and the reasons that they're coming has shifted. And I think we're going to see the fruit of that work for years and years. I could do this all day, Jen, with things that Vice President Harris has done and no one talks about. So I have been just on the train for years that he needed to be a one-term president and that she was an excellent successor to him. And I think it's played out in a really strange way that presents some challenges and also some opportunities for her. But I am thrilled that America is finally getting to have a real introduction to her.
Nice. What a whole episode just on what she's been doing that we haven't been paying attention to.
100%.
Yeah, the Northern Triangle is not a sexy topic the media is trying to cover that's going to get a lot of clicks. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
And that's a lot of her portfolio. Gun violence prevention, building partnerships in the Indo-Pacific to counter China's influence. I mean, she's worked a lot on AI and what should the global rules around AI look like. We're not going to get, awesome reels about that, but it's real hard work that plays to her strengths and I think will make her an excellent president.
Moving on from her stepping up and what that was like to last week at the DNC. Y'all were there the whole time, reporting every day. What was that like? Because at home, it was incredible to watch. What was it like to be in the room?
I mean, the room was very charged the whole time. There was real enthusiasm. It was very different from the DNC we attended in 2016. Because the party is so unified, we weren't doing the Bernie people being sour grapes about Hillary having the nomination this time, right? It was a unified room. I think the room was unified both in its support of Vice President Harris and in its commitment to give Joe his due. There were a lot of thank you, Joe chants, a lot of signage, sustained applause for him when he spoke on Monday night. So everybody had gotten the memo, right? That we are passing the torch and we are doing it enthusiastically and with gratitude. And we are not turning our back on the past, but we are decidedly looking toward the future. There are long days in the room. It's a chaotic dynamic that I personally find exhausting. But it was very special to be there for her acceptance speech. Very special to see, 3 former presidents there, a current president and 2 former presidents endorsing her. You just don't get to be in places very often where there are multiple people who've been called president. So it's a pretty overwhelming, component of this chapter in history, especially because this election has been so unique.
This is a new chapter, and it felt like an incredibly positive chapter. What I keep thinking about is that, for almost 10 years now, we have been this very broad coalition of people that used to be Republican all the way to the Bernie Bros. And you just felt that this is now this new path that really includes all that input. It's not, the hardcore progressive reaction of 2020 when we were all in our camps. It's not, a super... it didn't feel like that the conservative, more moderate members of the Democratic Party were either leading the way or siloed. It just really felt integrated. You got Bernie up there, then you have Pritzker bragging about being a billionaire. You have Kamala giving a really conservative speech, a speech focused on law and order and protecting our border and our military. And then you have a crowd pouring out love for Elizabeth Warren and the input and impact she's had on our policy with regards to childcare and student loan repayment. And we have policy about housing and making housing more affordable next to all that. It just felt really integrated and powerful and just like, this diversity is our strength. We have the peak and the high points of all these different parts of the coalition coming together and saying, you take this, I'll take this, we'll run with this. And she is such an incredible candidate to lead a party like that because she is the leader. It's like the Avengers, assembled, and so it was incredibly powerful, and it is a big party. You know, like I got to see Boyz II Men. It was great. Stevie Wonder walked past me. What's to
come on,
complain
man.
about? You
Pink.
know, like
Yeah.
it just was so fun, and everybody was just delighted. They're just so excited and happy to see this new chapter or era, as the case may be, opening up in front of us. This was different. This just felt like, aren't we happy to be here together? I mean, we didn't even talk about the roll call. Little John, everybody lost their dang minds. It was fantastic and patriotic. It was it felt patriotic.
Talking about everybody coming together, being a big tent, I wondered in watching it, it looked like everybody was so like-minded in what we needed to do moving forward. And it was the opposite of this, our past of being always in disarray, Democrats in disarray. Mm-hmm. And I really wondered, was this a collective, organic thing that happened? Like everyone in this big tent has just decided to work as one, be a coalition? Or was there some leadership before the convention that was saying, like, hey guys, this is the way forward? Because it seemed really natural when you're watching it.
I think some of it is that, you know, we talk about the Democratic Party, but if watching the whole situation with Joe Biden, and you can see that there were even battles among leadership, there isn't just one Democrat. It's a bunch of collection of humans. And when you get a bunch of collection of humans, like, it's going to be complicated. I think the difference at this point is just so much of what has united the Democratic Party for the last 9 years is opposition to Donald Trump. And so I think some of that is just, dang, we like get it. We got it. We know his shtick. We know how to handle it. Like, we're tired of letting him set the agenda. I think everybody, like the way that the Harris campaign and Vice President Kamala Harris in particular has been this sort of like steady hand of like, no, I'm not going to get drawn into this, has allowed everybody else to follow that lead and say, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to do this back and forth battle. But I just think, like I said, I think, you know, it's not just Americans who want to be about the future. The Democrats do too. The Democratic Party, we're Americans. We want to talk about what we want to be invested in the country. We want to think about what's coming next. And I think this sense of like, we get to do that now. We can't just be in this curled up ball defensive posture. Like the shock is worn off. You know what I mean? And like now we can kind of say, okay, the dust is settled. How do we want to be? How do we want to be? And Tim Walz are exhibiting such excellent leadership of like, this is how we're going to be. We're going to be joyful warriors. Like we're going to rise to the moment. We're going to remember that this can be fun, that we're out there with our fellow Americans fighting for what we believe in. And that's exhilarating. There's just, you know, there's a lot of external factors that have lined up. And I know some people were so terrified because they couldn't see a path forward with all these external factors. But, you know, I'm an eternal optimist. I believe in America. I believe in politics. So, like, I don't feel like I'm just knocked back with surprise. I'm like, no, this is what people want. This doesn't surprise me that much that this is where we landed. I don't know how Beth feels, if she's as surprised as I don't think she is.
Well, I see it a little bit differently. I hope that Dems stay in disarray to some extent because I really value disagreement within the party. The Republican Party has been so harmed by an absence of disagreement within the party. And when there are disagreements, they have been dumb ones. And they're disagreements about people instead of disagreements about ideas. And that's bad. America suffers because we don't have Republicans in disarray to some extent, you know? So I don't want this lockstep to continue to be the whole future of the party. But what I do think is really positive here is a clarity of priority about this election.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And I hear from Vice President Harris, but also from sort of the Democratic leadership in podcasting and journalism, people saying these polls are real. What we know now that we didn't take seriously in 2016 is that Donald Trump can win. And the polls were showing that he was going to win. I mean, I think we were absolutely on a glide path. I think when he talked with such confidence at the RNC, he was justified in doing that. If something had not changed, we would absolutely have a second Trump term. And I think from Vice President Harris's leadership, but permeating throughout the party, people understand the reality of that, the stakes of that. As good as everything feels right now, what you heard from the Clintons and the Obamas and from the vice president herself is like, this is going to be close. This election is a battle. Just about any outcome is possible here. So we don't have the luxury of being in disarray right now. But I hope that luxury comes again at some point, because I think good governance needs people advocating for really different approaches to legislation, to policy, to issues, to messaging. So I never view Dems in disarray as necessarily bad. But I think that right now the clarity of priority around the November decision that has to be made is really healthy.
So I would like to hear you discuss your thoughts on, I mean, this is such a big question and you'll just have to parse it out in some way. But the differences, let's just take it to the conventions. The difference between the RNC and the DNC. There's a lot of slivers to that pie chart, of course. But in general, let's say that we've got voters watching who they're conflicted. So they're not sure yet. I don't even know if those still exist. I don't know if the undecided voter is real or fake. But what's your take on what we are seeing? We've got this and we've got this. In broad strokes, where are we at here?
If you go back to 2016 again, the RNC was clearly grappling with a hostile takeover. There were people who were in shock that Donald Trump was the nominee, and there were people who were in ecstasy, but it was more on the shock side there in person. At this point, you have full-blown acceptance. This is what the party is about. This is who is in charge of it. I think if you compare the two, the Republican Party is never going to have the celebrity power that the Democratic Party has. Mm-hmm. It's never going to have the celebration. It's a different vibe all around. Even where it tries to replicate, the Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan of it all. It just feels a little bit like we're trying to play in an arena that's not ours. In terms of what the two parties have to offer, Sarah can speak to the Democratic Party better than I can. I read all of Project 2025. Okay, I read the 900-page mandate for leadership. And there's a lot in it. And I think a lot of what's in it could be good. There's some good ideas in there. My least favorite part of the DNC was the constant shtick about Project 2025 because it's 900 pages. There's something in there that everybody can get on board with. And then there's some terrible things in there too. If that document is at all representative of the MAGA movement, and I think it is, the animating principles to me are, we want families to be defined as mom, dad, and kids. And that comes through in everything J.D. Vance says. Families are mom, dad, and kids. And other families don't count. And we definitely should not do anything that affirms those families. We should not spend federal dollars supporting those families. And we should not teach people that those families are normal. That is a pillar of where the Republican Party is right now. The second animating principle that I see is government should be used to advance our agenda. We should use every single tool that we have to advance the political agenda of the president at the expense of people who've spent their careers in government. Everything that came before us does not matter. What matters is what we want to do now, and we will use all the levers of government to do it. But we will still use the argument that government doesn't belong in your business when it suits us. And it suits us around education and healthcare to say government doesn't belong in your business. And I think that's what the Republican Party is offering right now.
Beth, assuming you have your ear to the ground on conservatives in this country, what are you hearing from them? Like, what, if we can get past the MAGA movement, the Christian nationalism, if the Republican Party can define what their actual values are, aside from just what they're against. What are people saying about rebuilding the party? I do think we need two parties. I don't, even though the Democrats can build a broad coalition and get things done, I think it's better to have both. So on the inside, what are people saying about, 4 years from now?
The interesting thing about Project 2025's origins is that group of people were planning and hoping for a DeSantis presidency. That document was about moving on from Trump. It was about, how do we take what he started and refine it and keep it moving forward? Now, the overall vision of that document is not one that I can get on board with, because that idea that families only look one way loses me. I'm out at that pivotal moment. I try to be generous, because I don't want to have hardening of my heart around Donald Trump. So let's say that Elon Musk builds the best Mar-a-Lago ever, and it happens to be on Mars, and Donald Trump goes there and is thrilled about it. Okay, so he is totally removed from our political scene. His influence is going to be a generational part of that party. There are new Republican voters now who've really only known a Trump presidency, people who've only been interested in politics because of Donald Trump. So I think the idea that that's just going to wash out of the party is divorced from the reality that we're living in. And it is probably going to take sort of groups on the inside and groups on the outside conspiring to kind of retake the party, if there's any enthusiasm around doing that. And if not, it maybe becomes more of a Ron DeSantis style big government, big conservative government movement. And I think that might be the most likely scenario right now.
Even as a lifelong Democrat, I want a healthy Republican Party. What nothing frustrated me more than, and still frustrates me, when the pro-Palestinian movement, which I in large support, says things like, they don't even listen, we won't even go over there. That's not healthy. The idea that the Democrats are the only serious people at the party that you can actually speak about something that matters as much as that does, not great. Not great for the Democrats, not great for the Republicans, not great for the Palestinian people, right? That's not what we want. We don't want a situation in which something as high stakes as that, only one party you feel is serious enough to talk to about it. That's not what we want for anybody.
Of course. And kind of to that, ancillary to that, I think I'd like to hear from you both kind of as we wrap here. This election, as you both mentioned, got an intensity around it that is bananas. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you see are the stakes here. It's a big election. Voting matters. It's not inconsequential, and it will reverberate through policy, through things that actually affect our lives, one way or another, through our position globally, all of it, the climate and environment. And so I'd just like to hear you both say, okay, well, this is what we have. So many people lament the two-party. We need a third party. Here, this is what we have. This is who we have. We've got this one and we've got this one. That's who we're voting for. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on the stakes here on this particular election.
I'm not going to tell you it's the election of our lifetime, because nobody believes you anymore if you say that, because we say that every time. But you know what? It's kind of true every time. It always has stakes. If you want to think about the stakes, think about Dobbs. That's playing out in real ways every day in American women's lives, who are forced to, give birth in an emergency room bathroom because they won't let them in the door. So this is real. This plays out. Politics matters. I know it seems silly. I love that interview with Jelly Roll he did with the New York Times. But when he got to the part about voting doesn't matter, I was like, no, Jelly Roll, no. What are you saying? And because we're so conspiratorial. We're so cynical, and we confuse cynicism for analysis. It's not the same thing. You can see, it doesn't mean you're smart because you're questioning. That doesn't make it intellectual automatically. You know, it's who I think it was Westmore who said skepticism should be your companion, not your close companion. He had this great moment in his speech about cynicism and skepticism. Like, you should be skeptical, but not to the point where you can't see anything else. Because it does matter. And there will also be a Wednesday. You know, like, there will also be a Wednesday. We have to really hold the line. This is true in everything. This is true in parenting. This is true in your friendships, that you have to face the fact that this matters and you could fail, and also that you will most likely get another chance in some way, shape, or form. That suffering is hard and it will work on you and it will pass, and then more might come. You know what I mean? Like, that's just this. Election is just another manifestation of that, right? That you want to be in it. My advice to people is not act out of fear that the stakes are so high, but understand that this is a moment, and don't you want to be a part of it? Vote, be a poll worker, knock doors, write postcards to your fellow Americans across the country. There's a million ways. Hell, just get on with Carole King for Swifties for Kamala. Just join a fun Zoom, if nothing else, because we're supposed to be in it together. And there aren't a lot of ways that we get to be in it on a grand scale with our fellow Americans, like a presidential election. And it's great. It's really, really great.
Don't get to hear that very often. Beth?
For me, I go back to something that you learn as a first-year law student, which is hard cases make bad law. When you have someone come in who is really committed to just doing what he feels, instead of asking, how do we typically do this? It is a hard case for government to handle, and it makes for bad outcomes. We are getting a lot of, in my opinion, pretty bad Supreme Court law because of the hard case that Trump presents. And that will just happen throughout government. It's already happened from the first term, where agencies are so disrupted. And I get that people have questions about the bureaucracy, about the deep state, about the size and scope of the federal government. All legitimate, all things I'm happy to hash out. Like I said, I found some good ideas in Project 2025. I'm for everything being on the table. But I'm for everything being on the table with a person who respects the office. And if you have a second Trump presidency, that is a person who I think does not respect the office. And if you have a Congress made up of Republicans, there are no guardrails around that whatsoever. And so we just don't know. What we do know is that something catastrophic will happen that the president will have to deal with. And if you have a certainty that the system is going to be in chaos, a certainty that this person is a hard case that leads to bad law, and you add on to that some kind of catastrophe, whatever it is, but something big enough to get to the Oval Office. We've just seen this movie before. We know how that goes. It's not a risk that I'm willing to take.
Well, and the part of Project 2025 that Beth hasn't mentioned is they have a roster of people they're ready to fill all those positions with.
Sure.
I think Americans just want to go forward. I don't want to keep fighting about the same things with the same people for another 10 years. My dad sent me a text message. My dad's full MAGA. It was like, I just really hope you listen to what they have to say about the country. And I said, and not be blinded by your hatred of Donald Trump. And I said, Dad, I don't hate Donald Trump. I've spent too much time with him at this point. I've read too many books. I've read too many family stories. I've just spent too much time with the man. He is too human to me at this point for me to hate him. I just think he's uniquely ill-suited for this job. I just think he's uniquely ill-suited.
And I will say on the Harris side, I agree that she's uniquely suited for it. And what I would say to people who are skeptical of her, who are not excited, who don't care about electing the first woman or the first woman of color to this office, you don't have to be. This woman is a prosecutor in her bones. She respects the rule of law. She isn't going around promising to restore reproductive freedom for every woman in the country. She's promising that if Congress does that, she'll sign it into law. So you can hear in everything she says, I respect our system. I may want to do all kinds of things that are bigger and faster and harder than our system will allow, but I respect the system and I will work within it. And I really think that's what we need as we do try to move on from the past 10 years of the same old arguments.
On that note, I mean, girls,
Thank you.
I wish y'all were just a little smarter. They just rattle off their knowledge. It's just right there under the skin. Thanks for talking. Thanks for just being a place that we can discuss this and learn and think and find just not, I don't know if comfort is the right word, but forward motion.
Yeah.
Because all this can be very paralyzing.
Thank you for
that's how
being
it
willing to discuss
feels.
it, Jen. It would be easier for you not to, and we understand that and really respect that you're willing to.
Well,
And that's leadership, because everybody needs to do that. Everybody needs to just start the conversation, put out the yard sign, wear the shirt. Like, we have to remember that we are in this together, even the people we disagree with, even the people who we cannot fathom how they got there. There is more to them than their political beliefs. That was my favorite part of Oprah's speech. Mama Oprah, may she lead us forever. Like, if your house was on fire, we're going to help you. We're not going to ask you your party registration first. You know, we're tackling some big problems. Like, we're not going to be able to parse what you posted on Facebook before I help you. Like, that's not who we are. And we just have to lean into that.
So before we go, first of all, this is hard work
Mm-hmm.
for y'all.
Yes.
I appreciate you being in the trenches every day.
Yep.
Like, take care of yourselves and keep coming back
so,
over and over so we can learn from you and hash it out. But where can we find all of your resources? Where can our listeners find you to keep listening as we barrel towards this election?
Yep.
Well, we're at Pantsuit Politics on every podcast player. Our website is pantsuitpoliticsshow.com. That's kind of a good front door. We have a Substack that we write every Friday. We have premium shows. If you want to spend a lot of time with us and kind of have us be your daily dose of political therapy and information, we're happy to do that. So just come over to the website, check out the podcast, and then there are lots of ways to connect with us from there.
We have 2 books. Our first book is I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, A Guide to Grace-Filled Political Conversations. And our second book is Now What? How to Move Forward When We're Divided About Basically Everything.
there it is.
Perfect.
Perfect. You're perfect.
You're perfect.
Okay, please hurry yourselves back to this town
Oh, we
so we
will.
can have our next lunch together. Beth and I were just saying the last one was like 3 years ago. Like,
Well, and it was like, didn't it
2021.
start as one meal, and by the time we left, it was time for another meal?
exactly correct.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I'll just say we tipped well.
We did.
to make up for the table we
Yeah.
hogged.
Yes.
For 4
Well, it was in
hours.
Texas. The restaurant was big. There were plenty of tables.
Correct. All right, girls.
Thank
Love ya.
you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being
We
here.
love you too.
Thank you.
You guys, hope that conversation was useful to you or encouraging to you or thought-provoking to you, all the things that I always experience after having a conversation with Beth and Sarah. And I appreciate their differences. I appreciate their 2 perspectives. I always learn something from each of them. And we certainly want to use this space, this particular podcast here at For the Love, for goodness and for democracy and for civic engagement and ultimately for community and connection. So more to come around these ideas. If you go to jenhatmaker.com under the podcast tab, we'll have all this in one place for you. Sarah and Beth are good follows. So I'll make sure you have their socials, their website, their books, all the things that you would need to plug into their channel. They're highly trustworthy voices in this very complicated space. And so thanks for being here. We love putting this show together for you, and we love our community. So you guys, see you next week.
See you next time.